The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning with no return address. Just my name in handwriting I didn't recognize, and a single pressed rose petal that fell out when I opened it and landed on my desk like it had been waiting 20 years to get there. I sat in my Charleston office, hands shaking, reading words that unlocked every door I thought had been sealed forever. By Friday, my mother would be standing in a courtroom watching her own lies read aloud by a stranger. But that morning, all I could do was press that rose petal against my chest and whisper the only name that ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Grandma Ida. Some letters take 20 years to arrive at the right door. If this one reached you today, subscribe so the next one finds you too. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? Now let me take you back to where it all began, to a Tuesday morning and a rose petal that changed everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning with no return address. Just my name on the front. Clara Reeves. Written in handwriting I had never seen before, careful and deliberate, the kind of penmanship that belongs to someone who still believes that how you write a person's name says something about how much you respect them. I almost didn't open it. My desk that morning was buried under site plans for a corporate garden installation in Mount Pleasant, and my coffee had gone cold an hour ago, and my assistant had already forwarded me 3 emails that each began with the phrase, "just circling back." It was that kind of Tuesday, but something about the envelope made me stop. It was heavier than it looked, and when I picked it up and turned it over, a single pressed rose petal slipped out from the unsealed flap and landed on my desk like it had been waiting 20 years to get there. I sat very still for a moment. The petal was pale pink, almost translucent at the edges, dried flat the way you press flowers between the pages of a heavy book when you are trying to save something beautiful before it disappears. I knew that petal. Not this specific one, but the kind, the color, the shape. There had been a rose bush in a small backyard on Jones Street in Savannah, Georgia, that produced exactly this shade of pink every June. I had not seen that garden in over a decade, but I would have recognized those petals anywhere. My hands were not quite steady when I unfolded the letter inside. The writer introduced herself as Miriam Cole. She said she was 70 years old and had lived 3 houses down from my grandmother on Jones Street for most of her adult life. She said she had been trying to find the right words for a long time, and then she said the thing that made the walls of my Charleston office feel very far away. She said my grandmother's house was about to be sold. She said my mother had filed the paperwork. And she said that if I did not act within 72 hours, a piece of property that my grandmother had specifically and legally protected for me would be transferred to someone who had spent 20 years pretending it did not exist. I read the letter twice. Then I read it a third time. At the bottom of the page, Miriam Cole had written 4 words in a slightly shakier hand, as if she had paused before writing them, as if she had wanted to make sure she meant them before she put them down. She would want this. I set the letter on my desk beside the rose petal. Outside my office window, Charleston was doing what Charleston does in October, which is look unreasonably beautiful in the morning light. All white buildings and harbor glitter and the kind of sky that makes you feel briefly certain that everything is going to be fine. I did not feel certain that everything was going to be fine. By Friday, I would be standing in a Savannah courtroom watching my mother's attorney realize that 30 years of careful, quiet planning by a woman who grew roses and wrote letters in longhand had just dismantled everything my mother thought she had built. But that Tuesday morning, all I could do was press that rose petal gently between my fingers and say the only name that had ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Grandma Ida. Let me take you back to Savannah, Georgia, in the summer of 2003. The magnolias were in full bloom that afternoon. I remember that detail with a clarity that still surprises me, the way certain memories attach themselves to something sensory and refuse to let go. The whole street smelled like them. Heavy, sweet, almost too much. The way beautiful things sometimes are when they know they are about to be taken away. I was 11 years old. It was a Thursday in July, 2 weeks before my birthday, and I had just walked home from a friend's house carrying a library book about Georgia wildflowers that I had been meaning to return for a month. I came through the front door of our house on Forsyth Park expecting the usual sounds of the afternoon, the television in the living room, my brother Marcus's music coming down from upstairs, maybe my mother on the phone in the kitchen. What I found instead was a garbage bag sitting in the middle of the hallway, black, the heavy-duty kind, tied at the top, my name written on a piece of masking tape in my mother's handwriting. Patricia Reeves was standing at the kitchen counter when I walked in. She was not crying. She was not angry. That was the thing I have never been able to explain properly to anyone who did not grow up with her. She was calm, completely, terrifyingly calm, the way a person is calm when they have already made a decision and moved past the part where it bothers them. She looked at me the way you look at something you have decided to get rid of. Not with hatred. With finality. You need to go stay somewhere else, she said. I thought she meant for the night. I actually asked if I should bring my library book. She did not answer that. She walked past me to the hallway and picked up the garbage bag and held it out. Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs. He was 15, tall already, his father's jaw and his mother's eyes. He looked down at the two of us in the hallway, and he did not say a single word. He just watched, leaning against the railing the way you lean against something when a situation does not involve you. I took the bag. The strap of it was awkward in my hand. Too big, too loose, swinging against my knee as I walked. My mother opened the front door. The July heat rolled in like a wall. "Go to Grandma Ida's," she said, "and don't come back." I walked 2 miles through a Savannah afternoon that felt like the inside of an oven, past the tourists on Bull Street and the horse-drawn carriages near the squares, and the old men playing chess outside the coffee shop on Whitaker. Nobody looked at me twice. A girl with a garbage bag and a library book, walking in the heat. Just part of the scenery. Ida Mae Reeves lived on Jones Street in a house that was small enough to feel like a hug. White wooden siding, dark green shutters, window boxes with geraniums, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs that she had painted the color of the sky on a clear day. I had been to that house every Christmas and every Easter my whole life. I had eaten Sunday dinners at that kitchen table. I had fallen asleep on that couch with the television on more times than I could count. But I had never arrived there like this. I knocked on the door. When Ida opened it, she looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. She looked at the garbage bag. She looked back at me. She did not ask what happened. She did not call my mother. She did not say anything at all for a long moment. She simply stepped aside, held the door open wide, and put her hand gently on the back of my head as I walked past her, into the cool, dim hallway that smelled like rose water and something baking. Then she closed the door behind me, and the Savannah heat stayed outside where it belonged. Later that evening, after she had fed me and after I had cried in the bathroom with the faucet running so she would not hear it, I lay in the small bedroom at the back of the house that smelled like old wood and clean sheets and listened to the ceiling fan turn slow circles above me. Through the thin wall, I heard Ida's voice in the kitchen. Low, steady, unhurried. She was on the phone. "She's here," Ida said. There was a pause. Then, quieter, as if she was settling into something she had been expecting for a long time. "Just like we planned." I did not understand what that meant. I was 11 years old and exhausted, and I had walked 2 miles in the July heat, carrying everything I owned in a garbage bag. I told myself it was nothing. I closed my eyes. I would not understand those 4 words for another 20 years. Ida Mae Reeves was 72 years old and had never owned anything worth more than $30,000 on paper. But she was the richest person I ever knew. She woke every morning at 5:30. Not because she had to, but because that was when the garden needed her. The rose bushes along the back fence were particular about their mornings, she told me once. They liked to be checked before the heat set in, before the bees arrived, before the day started making its demands. I learned to wake up with her. I learned to pull on my shoes in the gray pre-dawn quiet and follow her out the back door into the garden, where the dew was still heavy on everything and the air smelled like something the city had not gotten to yet. She would hand me a pair of small gloves, the kind with the rubber grip on the palms, and we would walk the rows together without talking. Ida touched each bush lightly as she passed. A check, a greeting. I was never entirely sure which. She knew every plant by its position and its history. This one came from a cutting her own mother had given her in 1968. That one she had grown from a seed she found in a paper envelope at an estate sale in Beaufort. The pale pink ones along the south fence were her favorites. She called them her June bugs because they bloomed every June without fail, no matter what kind of winter had come before. When I was 12, she handed me a small tin box with a painted lid. Inside were seeds she had saved herself, dried and labeled in her careful handwriting. She said, "Every garden starts with someone deciding to save something. You hold on to these." I held on to them for 20 years. Life on Jones Street had a rhythm I had never known before. Breakfast at 7, always. Grits on weekdays, biscuits on Sundays. Ida packed my lunch for school in a paper bag with my name written on it, which embarrassed me at 12, and which I would give anything to have back now. She came to every parent conference, every school play, every spelling bee I entered and lost spectacularly in the 6th grade. She sat in the front row for all of it. My mother never called. Not once in 7 years. Marcus sent one postcard the Christmas I was 13, a generic card with a snowy scene that said "Season's Greetings" in gold letters and had a brief note inside that said, "Hope you are good." I read it so many times the fold went soft. Then I put it away and stopped expecting more. Ida never forced the subject. She had a gift for not pushing, for letting things be what they were without editorializing. But once, when I was 13 and came home from school quiet in the way that means something happened, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and waited. I told her a girl in my class had asked why my mother never came to anything. Ida was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some people are afraid of what they cannot control. And baby, you were never the controllable kind. That is not a flaw. That is a feature." I did not fully understand what she meant, but I wrote it in the back of my notebook and kept it. Once a month, on the 3rd Saturday, a man came to the house. He was tall and thin, somewhere in his 60s, always wearing a brown suit that looked like it had been good quality once and was now simply familiar. He and Ida would sit at the kitchen table with the door pulled mostly closed, speaking in voices too low to catch full sentences. He always brought a folder of papers and he always left without it. When I asked who he was, Ida smiled without looking up from the dish she was drying. "His name is Ernest," she said. "He helps me keep my promises." I did not ask what promises. I was just grateful to have a home. But I noticed that after Ernest's visits, Ida always seemed lighter somehow, like something that had been pressing on her had been carefully, methodically addressed, like a woman who was building something slowly and deliberately and was satisfied with the progress. I did not understand what she was building. Not yet. Ida Mae Reeves died on a Sunday morning in April, with her hands folded on her chest and her rose garden in full bloom outside the window, as if the world had decided to give her a proper goodbye. I found her just after 6 in the morning. I had woken early the way I always did, reaching for my shoes in the gray pre-dawn quiet, expecting to find her already in the garden. But the back door was still closed. Her coffee mug sat unused on the counter. I walked down the hallway to her bedroom and knocked softly, and when she did not answer, I opened the door. She looked peaceful. That is the word people use, and it is usually a kindness, a way of saying something gentle about something hard. But in Ida's case, it was simply true. She looked like a woman who had finished everything she had set out to do and had laid down when she was ready. One hand rested on the quilt her mother had made. Outside her window, the pale pink June bugs were blooming 3 months early, which I have never been able to explain and have stopped trying to. The funeral was held 4 days later at the Methodist Church on Bull Street. The room was full in the way that small community rooms get full, not with important people, but with real ones. Her neighbors from Jones Street. The woman who ran the flower shop 2 blocks over and had been buying rose cuttings from Ida for 15 years. The librarian who had let Ida return books late for decades without a word about the fines. 6 children from the elementary school where Ida had volunteered every Thursday afternoon for as long as anyone could remember. I sat in the front pew in the only dress I owned that was dark enough for the occasion and tried to hold myself together with both hands. Patricia arrived 20 minutes after the service began. I heard the door before I saw her. That particular sound of late arrival, the soft apologetic creak of old church hinges, the rustle of fabric, the ripple of turned heads. I did not turn around, but I felt her presence move through the room the way a cold front moves through a warm afternoon, changing the quality of the air before it fully arrives. She wore black from collar to hem, a silver necklace with a small cross. Her hair was done carefully, her makeup understated in the way that takes effort to achieve. She moved to a pew near the middle of the church and sat with her hands folded and her chin slightly lifted and her eyes carrying the particular expression of a woman performing grief for an audience she has assembled in her own mind. She did not look at me once during the service. Marcus found me afterward in the parking lot. He was 22 now, broader than I remembered, wearing a shirt that was too stiff for a funeral, the kind you buy for occasions you do not attend often enough to own the right clothes for. He stopped in front of me and put his hands in his pockets. "Grandma left everything to Mom," he said. "There is nothing here for you." He said it quietly, without cruelty, the way you deliver information you have been told to deliver. Then he walked away toward the car where Patricia was waiting with the engine running. I stood in that parking lot for a moment, alone among the dispersing crowd, feeling the particular hollowness of being reminded that your absence from a family's story has been made official. Then someone said my name. I turned. A man in a brown suit was standing a few feet away. The same brown suit. The same careful posture. Ernest. "Miss Reeves," he said. "My name is Ernest Cobb. I was your grandmother's attorney for nearly 30 years. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. Cream-colored, sealed, my name written on the front in Ida's handwriting. He held it out with both hands, which struck me as a formal and deliberate gesture, the kind that means what is being handed over matters. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this," he said, "but not yet." He met my eyes. "You will know when." I took the envelope. I looked down at my name in Ida's handwriting, the letters careful and deliberate, the same hand that had written my lunch bags and my birthday cards and the labels on 30 years of seed packets. I put it in my jacket pocket. I carried that envelope across 4 apartments, 3 cities, and 1 entire career. I touched it 100 times and never broke the seal. I moved it from jacket to jacket the way you move something you cannot explain keeping but cannot bring yourself to let go of either. Until the Tuesday morning, a rose petal fell on my desk in Charleston, and a woman named Miriam Cole told me the time had finally come. But that morning was 14 years away still. And before I can tell you what the letter said, I need to tell you what happened in between. Because the distance between the girl who left Savannah with a sealed envelope and the woman who finally opened it is the whole point of this story. I left Savannah with $40, a carry-on bag, a sealed envelope I was too afraid to open, and a small tin box of rose seeds I had no logical reason to take with me. I told myself I was running toward something. Most days, I believed it. Clemson University accepted me on a partial scholarship that I still, even now, cannot fully account for. The financial aid office listed it as an anonymous educational trust, no name attached, just a deposit that arrived every semester with the reliability of something that had been carefully arranged rather than randomly awarded. I spent 2 years trying to trace it and eventually stopped, not because I gave up, but because some part of me already suspected the answer and was not ready to sit with it. I studied landscape architecture because it was the only thing that had ever felt like a language I already knew. My professors said I had an unusual instinct for the relationship between a space and the people who would eventually live inside it. I did not tell them that I had learned everything I knew about that relationship from a 72-year-old woman in a Jones Street backyard who talked to her rose bushes before the bees arrived. I graduated with honors on a Saturday morning in May. There was no one in the audience for me. I sat in my folding chair in the gymnasium and listened to the dean call my name, and walked across the stage and shook the hand extended to me and thought, Ida would have been in the front row. She would have brought a sign. She would have embarrassed me completely, and I would have loved every second of it. Josie Tran found me afterward in the parking lot, still in my gown, eating a granola bar from my purse because I had skipped breakfast. Josie was from Columbia, South Carolina, direct and practical in the way that people are when they have been taking care of themselves for a long time. We had met sophomore year in a studio class where we were assigned to redesign the same neglected campus courtyard and had argued productively about it for 3 weeks before becoming inseparable. She looked at me eating my graduation granola bar and said, "We are getting real food." It was not a suggestion. Josie became the person Grace had been in the original story, which is to say, she became the person who told me the truth when I needed it and showed up without being asked when it mattered. She was the first person I called when things went wrong and the last person I wanted to disappoint. Everyone needs a Josie. I was lucky enough to have one. I moved to Charleston 2 weeks after graduation with $600 and a sublet I had found on a bulletin board. I did design work for a landscape company for 3 years, learned the business end of things, saved carefully, and opened my own studio on a Tuesday morning in March when I was 26 years old. The studio was small. 1 room above a hardware store on King Street, 2 desks, a drafting table, a coffee maker that made noise like it was personally offended by the task. I named it Reeves Garden Design, which felt honest if not particularly inspired. The first project I completed on my own was a private garden for a family in Mount Pleasant. Small yard, partial shade. The clients wanted something that felt established rather than new, as if the garden had always been there and they had simply moved into it. I designed it around a central rose bed. Pale pink climbers along the south fence, the same variety Ida had grown on Jones Street. When I finished planting and stood back and looked at what I had made, something shifted quietly in my chest. Not grief, exactly. More like recognition. Like hearing a song you learned so long ago you forgot you knew it. I reached into my jacket pocket without thinking. The envelope was there, as it always was. Soft with age, its edges worn smooth from years of being touched and not opened. Not yet, I told myself. The same thing Ernest had told me 6 years earlier, but I was starting to understand that yet had an expiration date. 10 years after Ida died, on a slow Tuesday morning in October, when the harbor light was coming through my office window at a low golden angle, my assistant knocked on the door and set a piece of mail on top of my site plans. No return address. Just my name, Clara Reeves. And when I picked it up and turned it over, a single pressed rose petal slipped out and landed on my desk like it had been waiting 20 years to get there. The handwriting was not Ida's. I knew Ida's handwriting the way you know the sound of someone's voice. The The particular slant of it, the way her letters connected to each other with small, deliberate bridges, the capital R in Reeves that curved back on itself like it was reconsidering something. This was not that. This handwriting was rounder, older, slightly unsteady in the way that hands get when they have been asked to do something that matters. I read the letter slowly, then I read it again. Miriam Cole had lived on Jones Street for 41 years. She had watched Ida plant the rose garden in 1979. She had borrowed Ida's good casserole dish more times than she could count and had always returned it clean. She had sat with Ida on the front porch on summer evenings and talked about nothing in particular, which is the kind of talking that holds a friendship together over decades. She had also, she wrote, been present the day Ernest Cobb came to the house for the last time, the week before Ida died. She had not meant to overhear. She had been returning the casserole dish. What she heard through the screen door, she wrote carefully, was Ernest telling Ida that everything was in order, that the house was protected, that Clara would have everything she needed when the time came. And Ida saying, in the voice Miriam described as the most certain she had ever heard from any human being, "Good. That is all I ever wanted." I set the letter down and picked it up again. Miriam went on. She said that 6 weeks ago, a real estate agent had appeared on Jones Street. Young, clipboard in hand, measuring the front of Ida's house with the brisk efficiency of someone who has already decided what a property is worth. Miriam had spoken to him from her porch. He told her the house had recently come onto the market. He told her the owner had authorized the sale. The owner, he said, was Patricia Reeves. I stood up from my desk without deciding to. I walked to my office window and stood there looking at the harbor and breathing with some deliberateness until the feeling in my chest settled enough to think clearly. My mother had not stepped foot in that house in over 20 years. She had not spoken to Ida in the last decade of Ida's life. She had not attended to the property, had not paid its taxes, had not replaced the porch boards that I knew from memory had been soft since 2007. She had simply waited, and now, apparently, she had decided to collect. I called Josie from my office phone because my hands were not quite steady enough to trust my cell. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear traffic behind her, which meant she was walking somewhere, which meant she would give me exactly the kind of attention that moving gives a person when they need to think out loud. Someone I have never met just wrote me a letter, I said. She told me my grandmother protected something for me, and my mother is trying to sell it. There was a brief pause. Josie said, "How long do you have?" 72 hours, I said. Another pause. "Then call the lawyer," Josie said. "The one from the funeral." "You still have his card?" I did. I had always had his card. I kept it in the same place I kept the envelope, in the bottom drawer of my desk, tucked behind a folder of old project plans that I never threw away and never quite needed. I had moved that drawer's contents from office to office the way you move things that represent something you are not ready to name. I hung up with Josie and opened the bottom drawer. The envelope was there. Cream-colored, sealed, my name in Ida's handwriting, soft with age and years of being touched. Beside it, Ernest Cobb's business card. The cardstock had gone slightly yellow at the corners. The font was small and traditional, the kind of card a man prints when he intends to be in the same place for the rest of his professional life. Ernest Cobb. Attorney at law. Savannah, Georgia. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Then a voice answered. Older, measured, unhurried. The voice of a man who had been expecting this call for a very long time. "Miss Reeves," Ernest Cobb said, before I had given my name. "I have been waiting to hear from you." 3.5 hours later, I was in Savannah. I had packed a bag in 7 minutes, told my assistant I would be out for the rest of the week, and driven south on Highway 17, with the windows down and the radio off, thinking about a woman who had spent 30 years keeping promises to someone who was no longer alive to see them kept. Ernest Cobb's office was on the second floor of a building on Bull Street in Savannah, above a florist shop that smelled like gardenias and fresh-cut stems even from the sidewalk. I had driven down from Charleston that afternoon, 3.5 hours with the radio off, thinking about a woman who had spent 30 years keeping promises to someone who was no longer alive to see them kept. Ernest met me at the top of the narrow staircase and shook my hand with both of his, the greeting of a man who has been preparing for a specific moment for a very long time and is relieved it has finally arrived. The conference room was small. A round table, 4 chairs, a window looking out over the live oaks on Bull Street, their branches draped in Spanish moss that moved slowly in the October wind. Sitting at the far end of the table was a woman I had not noticed when I walked in. Her name was Diana Wells. Compact, mid-50s, short gray hair, the kind of face that gave nothing away. "Private investigator," Ernest said. She had a laptop open and a legal pad covered in handwriting too small to read from across the table. Ernest placed 3 items on the table with deliberate precision: a bound document, a manila folder, and a small wooden box with a brass latch that I recognized immediately as the box from Ida's kitchen shelf, the one she had kept beside the window that faced the garden. "Your grandmother's will," Ernest said, "was executed in 2009. It names you, Clara Reeves, as the sole beneficiary of her entire estate." He paused. "The house on Jones Street, her savings, all personal property. The total value is approximately $530,000. I stared at him without speaking. "But that is not why Diana is here," he said. Diana turned her laptop toward me. On the screen were scanned documents, deed transfer applications, notarized signatures, a letter from a real estate firm. "Your mother filed a competing claim," Diana said, her voice precise and unhurried. "She submitted documentation stating your grandmother lacked testamentary capacity when the will was signed." Diana clicked to a new screen. "It is without merit. Your grandmother had a full cognitive evaluation 2 weeks before signing. Complete competency confirmed, witnessed, notarized." She clicked again. What I was now looking at was a series of scanned envelopes. Dozens of them. Each one addressed to me. My dormitory at Clemson. My first apartment. My studio on King Street. Each envelope had been opened. "Your grandmother wrote to you every month for 20 years, Diana said. "Ernest forwarded every letter to every address he had for you." She paused. "They were intercepted. All of them. Opened and destroyed before they reached you. We traced the interceptions to a post office box registered in your mother's name." The room went very still. Ernest slid the wooden box across the table and opened the latch. Inside, arranged in careful chronological order, were letters. Dozens and dozens of them. Ida's handwriting. My name on each one. "These are the copies," Ernest said quietly. "Ida kept a copy of every letter she ever sent you. She told me she wanted her words to exist somewhere in the world, even if they never reached you." I reached in and took the letter on top. June 12, 2004. 6 weeks after the funeral. The summer I had left Savannah alone. "My darling Clara," it began. "I hope you know I did not choose this silence. It was chosen for me. But I want you to understand something I should have said out loud every single day. You were never the problem. You were always, from the very first moment, exactly what this family needed and was too broken to deserve." I set the letter down. I looked at Ernest. "How many letters are there?" I said. He looked back at me steadily. 240, he said. I sat in that conference room and read the letters in order. June 2004, September 2004, January 2005. Each one began the same way. "My darling Clara." Each one ended the same way. All my love always, Grandma Ida. Between those two anchors, 20 years of a life I had not been allowed to be part of. She wrote about the garden. She wrote about the mockingbird that came back every spring to the rose bush by the south fence and sang the same 4 notes as if trying to teach them to someone. In a letter from March 2008, she wrote, "I drove past your old school today and thought about the spelling bee. You were robbed. Pterodactyl has too many silent letters for anyone to be expected to know where they go." I laughed out loud at that. Then I pressed the letter against my chest and sat very still until the feeling passed. Diana set a folder on the table in front of me. Gently, the way you set something down when you know what it contains. "When you are ready," she said. I opened it. What Diana had assembled was a timeline so precise, it had the quality of something inevitable, as if the truth had always been this shape and had simply been waiting for someone to draw the outline around it. Patricia had known about Ida's will since 2011. Marcus had found a draft copy in Ida's desk during a visit to Jones Street that year. He had photographed the document and sent it to Patricia. Diana had the phone records. From that point, Patricia's actions had been deliberate and sequential. She had established a mail forwarding arrangement using documentation Diana described as almost certainly fraudulent. Every letter Ernest sent to Clara's addresses had been rerouted. Every single one. She had also begun laying the groundwork for a capacity challenge, collecting statements from distant acquaintances about Ida's supposed confusion in her later years, building a narrative, preparing a story she could tell a court. Marcus helped, Diana said. Not always willingly, I think, but consistently. I thought about Marcus at the top of the stairs. 15 years old, watching, not saying a single word. Some people learn early that silence is a form of participation. Ernest came back into the room and placed one final envelope on the table. Smaller than the others, unsealed. Ida's handwriting, shakier than the letters in the box, dated 3 weeks before she died. "She asked me to hold this separately," Ernest said. "She said you would know what it meant." I opened it. "My darling Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, then Ernest has done his job, and the garden is still standing, and you found your way back the way I always knew you would. I knew what your mother was. I knew what she would do. I could not stop her from sending you away. But I could make sure that everything I had was waiting for you when you were ready for it. Not because you needed the money, because you deserved to know that someone had been thinking about your future since the day you were born. The garden is yours, little one. It has always been yours. Come home and grow something. All my love, always, Grandma Ida." I folded the letter carefully along its creases. The door opened. Josie came in, slightly breathless, her coat half on, the expression she wears when she has moved fast because someone she loves needed her to. She had taken the first available train from Charlotte the moment I texted her from the highway. She looked at me sitting on the floor of the conference room, surrounded by 240 letters, and did not say anything for a moment. Then she sat down beside me on the floor and took my hand. "She knew everything," I said. Josie squeezed my hand once. "She always did," she said. "We stayed on that floor for a long time." Josie ordered food from somewhere that delivered late, and we ate without tasting it, and I read letters until my eyes went dry. And somewhere around midnight, Ernest came back in and told us the hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, 2 days away. I slept badly and woke early and put on the only suit I had brought and drove to the courthouse with the tin box of rose seeds on the passenger seat beside me, because it seemed important to bring something of Ida's into that room. Chatham County Courthouse, Courtroom 4A, 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. The room smelled like old wood and floor wax and the particular stillness of a space that has held too many difficult conversations to ever fully air out. I arrived 30 minutes early and sat in the front row and watched the room fill around me. Miriam Cole came in at 8:55 in a navy dress and took a seat 2 rows behind me. She caught my eye and nodded once, the nod of a woman who has decided that showing up is the minimum the situation requires and intends to do considerably more. Josie sat beside me, steady as a wall. Ernest settled his papers at the petitioner's table with the unhurried precision of a man who has been preparing for this particular morning for 14 years. Patricia arrived with her attorney, a younger man whose confidence had an inverse relationship with how the morning was actually going. She sat at the respondent's table without looking at me and arranged her hands carefully in her lap. The judge entered. The room went quiet. Patricia's attorney opened with the diminished capacity argument. He used the word confused 4 times in 6 minutes. He described Ida Mae Reeves as elderly, isolated, potentially subject to undue influence. He said it with the smooth confidence of someone who has made this argument before and found it effective. Ernest stood up. He placed the cognitive evaluation on the judge's bench. Conducted 2 weeks before the will was executed by Ida's physician of 20 years. Full competency confirmed, documented, witnessed, notarized. Then he opened the wooden box and read aloud from Ida's letter of June 12, 2004. The one about the garden, the one about the mockingbird that came back every spring to the south fence rose bush and sang the same 4 notes over and over as if trying to teach them to someone. The courtroom was very quiet. Ernest called Miriam Cole to the stand. She walked to the front slowly, hands folded, chin level. She described 41 years of living 3 houses down from Ida. She described the evening she stood at the screen door with the casserole dish and heard Ernest tell Ida that everything was in order, that the house was protected, and Ida responding with the most certain voice Miriam had ever heard from any human being. Then she said something she had not told me in her letter. The night after Clara left Savannah in the summer of 2003, Miriam said she had seen Patricia standing on the sidewalk outside Ida's house, standing and watching the lit windows, not moving, not knocking, just watching for a long time before turning and walking away. She looked directly at the judge when she finished. She was not saying goodbye, Miriam said. She was making sure the door was closed. Ernest presented the mail interception documentation next, the post office records, the forwarding arrangement in Patricia's name. Diana's 8 weeks of investigative work laid out with a precision that gave Patricia's attorney very little room to move. He attempted 2 objections and withdrew both before finishing the sentences. The judge reviewed the file. 8 minutes passed. Then he looked up. The court finds the will of Ida Mae Reeves to be valid and duly executed, he said. The petitioner, Clara Reeves, is recognized as the sole designated beneficiary. The motion to invalidate is denied. He paused. Evidence pertaining to mail interception and fraudulent documentation has been referred to the state's attorney. The relevant parties are advised to consult their counsel. Patricia did not drop her head dramatically. She simply became very still, the way a person becomes still when the story they have been telling for 20 years has just been read back to them by someone with no interest in preserving it. I stood. I picked up the tin box of rose seeds from the floor beside my chair. I walked toward the exit. As I passed the respondent's table, Patricia said my name. I stopped. I did not turn around. I did what I had to do, she said. Quiet, stripped of performance, the most honest thing I had ever heard her say. I stood still for 3 full seconds. So did Grandma Ida, I said. The difference is, she did it with love. I walked out into the Savannah morning, where the October light was doing what it always does in this city, which is make everything look like it was worth fighting for. The rose garden on Jones Street had been without a gardener for 14 years. I pushed open the back gate the morning after the verdict and stepped through into the backyard and stopped walking. Every bush was alive. Not perfect, not thriving the way they had looked when Ida walked the rows each morning before the bees arrived. The canes were long and unpruned. The soil along the south fence had gone dry and pale. But alive, every single one of them. The pale pink June bugs along the south fence, the climbers along the back wall, the compact bushes nearest the house that Ida had grown from her mother's cuttings in 1968. All of them, still here, in the quiet, stubborn way that things survive when they have been rooted deeply enough in good ground. I sat down on the back step where Ida used to sit with her coffee after the morning rounds and held the tin box in both hands and looked at the garden for a long time. Josie came out and sat beside me without being asked. "It needs work," she said. "Everything worth having does," I said. She handed me a coffee, which meant she had already found the coffee maker and figured out where Ida kept the filters. "This is something Josie does. She takes care of things quietly before you know they need caring for." Ernest stood in the garden doorway a few minutes later and looked at the rose bushes with the expression of a man seeing the conclusion of something he started a very long time ago. "She would be pleased," he said simply. I opened the tin box. Inside, exactly as they had been for 20 years, were Ida's seeds, dried and labeled in her careful handwriting. Pale pink, south fence variety, June blooming. The labels had yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was perfectly clear. I knelt at the base of the south fence and pressed my hand flat against the ground. Cool, dry, needing water and time, and someone to come back and pay attention to it. Needing exactly what I had needed when I was 11 years old and walked through that gate for the first time with a garbage bag and nowhere else to go. I took one seed from the box, small and dark, light as almost nothing in my palm, and pressed it into the ground the way Ida had taught me 20 years ago in this same garden on this same soil. "A garden doesn't grow by accident," she had told me. "Neither does a good life." 3 months later, the house on Jones Street opened its doors to its first residents. 4 teenagers, all in the process of aging out of the foster care system, all of them needing exactly what Ida had given me: not charity, not pity, simply a door that opens when you knock on it. Josie helped with the program. Ernest handled the legal structure. Miriam Cole arrived on the first morning with a casserole dish and has not stopped showing up since. We called it the Jones Street Garden Project because Ida had written in the margin of her will, in her own hand, for whoever needs a place to root. On opening morning, I stood in the backyard with the 4 teenagers and showed them the rose garden, pruned and watered now, given 3 months of the attention it had been waiting for. The June bugs were not blooming yet. January. Too cold. But the canes were healthy and the roots were sound. A girl named Deja, 15 years old, arms crossed against the January cold, looked at the rose bushes and then looked at me. "Do they always come back?" she asked, "even when nobody takes care of them?" I thought about 14 years and a tin box of seeds, and a woman who woke at 5:30 every morning because she believed the garden needed her. "They come back," I said, "when someone planted them right to begin with." Deja uncrossed her arms, just slightly, but I noticed. I pressed my hand one last time against the soil at the base of the south fence, the same soil Ida had pressed her hands into 1,000 times before me, and I understood completely what she had been building all those years: a floor. So that no matter how far I fell, I would not fall through. A garden doesn't grow by accident. Neither does a good life. Neither does love. There is a particular kind of love that never announces itself. It does not arrive with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It does not ask to be acknowledged or thanked or even noticed. It simply shows up, quietly, in the background of your life, doing the work that needs doing without requiring you to know it is being done. It plants things. It tends them. It waits, with a patience that most of us will never fully understand, for the right season to arrive. Most of us, if we are lucky, have known at least one person who loved us this way. Someone who showed up before we knew we needed showing up for. Someone who built something on our behalf while we were busy surviving, so that when we finally turned around, there it was. A floor beneath us, a door that opened, a garden still alive after 14 years of no one tending it. I have been thinking lately about all the things I did not know were happening while I was looking the other way. The phone calls made on my behalf that I never heard. The documents signed and filed and carefully maintained by hands I did not think to thank until it was almost too late. The letters written every month for 20 years by someone who refused to let silence be the last word, even when silence was the only thing that reached me. We talk a lot about the people who hurt us, and that conversation matters. The wounds are real, and they deserve to be named. But I think we talk less often about the people who quietly, persistently, stubbornly refuse to let the hurt be the whole story. The ones who kept building while everything else was falling. The ones who trusted that the person they were building for would find their way back eventually, even if they would not be there to see it. If you have someone like that in your life, tell them. Say it out loud, today, before the envelope sits unopened in a drawer for 14 years, before the letters pile up unread in a wooden box, before you are standing in a garden that survived without you, and finally understanding what it cost someone to make sure it did. And if you do not have someone like that, if you are the one who has been walking in the rain with a garbage bag and no one waiting at the end of the road, then let me say this as clearly as I know how to say it. Someone should have built that for you. The fact that they did not is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their limitations. And the most extraordinary thing a person can do, after being failed that way, is turn around and build it for someone else. That is what gardens are for. Not just the growing, but the teaching. Not just the blooming, but the saving of seeds so that someone who comes after you will have something to plant. Build your garden, tend it carefully, save the seeds, and trust that somewhere, in ways you may not live to see, something you planted is still growing. That is what I have been sitting with since the day I pressed that first seed back into the Jones Street soil. And it is why I wanted to tell you this story today, not as a cautionary tale and not as a triumph, but as an honest account of what it looks like when love refuses to give up on someone. If this story reached something real in you, if it reminded you of someone who loved you quietly, or if it gave words to something you have been carrying for a long time without knowing what to call it, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me about your garden. Tell me about the person who tended it when you could not. Tell me about the seed someone planted in you that is still growing, even now, even after everything. And if you are still waiting for someone to plant that seed, tell me that too. Because sometimes the most important thing is simply knowing that someone is listening. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Not because the numbers matter, but because somewhere out there is a person sitting alone who needs to be reminded that silence is not the same as absence, and that love, the real kind, the kind that tends things in the dark, is more common than we think. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story. Because there are more of them. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things in quiet ways. Stories that do not make the news, but that change the shape of a life completely. I will see you in the next one. And in the meantime, go water something. Clara's story is not about a house, a will, or a courtroom victory. It is about what happens when someone decides that a child is worth protecting, quietly, legally, persistently, across decades, through illness, through silence, and through death. Ida Mae Reeves never gave a speech. She never confronted Patricia in a parking lot or called a lawyer in anger. She sat in a garden every morning, wrote letters that never arrived, and made sure that when the time came, the truth would be waiting. That is a form of love that most of us will never be recognized for. The kind that plants and tends and trusts the soil to do its work. If you have someone like Ida in your life, a grandmother, a neighbor, a quiet teacher who believed in you before you believed in yourself, call them today. Not tomorrow. Today. Because some letters take 20 years to arrive, and some people won't be there when they finally do.